Hello and welcome to another edition of the Clubs and Corks Golf Podcast. Luke Taylor here with my guy, Ben Curtis. Hi, Ben.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, Ben. Hey, we got a really awesome guest here. The man, the myth, the legend. Cornell graduate. So we got someone smarter than us.
Yeah, definitely me. That's for sure.
Tom Doak, welcome to the Clubs and Corks Golf Podcast.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah.
Is it really?
Yeah, it's a break from isolating at home.
Yeah. Well, thanks. That's perfect. So, I've played. We were just talking about how many courses we've played. So, the funny thing is, I've been to Stream Song. I've played red and black. Never played blue, as you know. We've talked about this. The course was closed. I think I pissed off Lou Thompson, Forest Dunes. We were there 2 years ago, and the loop, which I really want to talk about because that's a really interesting concept. 2 courses in one. Hopefully, you got paid twice as much.
No, you've met Lou.
No, but I met Lou, and you obviously know Lou very well and personally. Really good guy, kind of salt of the earth, Arkansas. Made his business in trucking. And really interesting story, and I met him and stuff. He's like, so you're going to play the loop? I met him in the pro shop. And I said, no, we're playing the Dunes course, and then we're going to Arcadia Bluffs. Man, his smile went from big to like all the way to the bottom. But it looked beautiful. And then, and I was supposed to go to Bandon last year, but due to the pandemic, I had to cancel. So I haven't played any course, but I have played Pasatiempo. And you did a redesign of that in one of my favorite courses.
Yeah, I've been lucky to work on a lot of great old golf courses, but a place like Pasatiempo, that's really restoration. I mean, there's no ideas out there that I have any ego attached to. It's all just trying to put it back as close as we could to what Mackenzie built. And fortunately, they have really good information on what was there originally and a million old pictures of it, so I think it's pretty close.
Did you go into his house?
I have never been in his house. I've been there 20 times. I've never been in that house.
Yeah.
I've hit a ball into his backyard.
So yeah, I mean, thanks for joining us.
Yeah. So Tom, doing some research. Obviously, you're really respected in the golf world and in the golf design business, and being a player in that, like. When we go to tour events, we're trying to dissect the golf course, trying to figure out where you want to place it and hit it. And obviously, as a player, you kind of gravitate towards certain designers. Obviously, one of my favorites, Alistair McKenzie, just build these really iconic golf courses. So, my question to you, I know, just going through your history here, how did you get into the game of golf? Was it through your parents? Was it while you were at school, at Cornell doing, Cornell, doing, your, design and landscape with, background. What got you into the game?
I started playing when I was 10. My parents didn't play a lot of golf. I grew up outside of New York City. I was born in New York City and grew up in Stamford. My dad worked in the city. And luckily, when I was 9 or 10, the city built a public golf course a mile from my house that, a farmer had left the land to the city to build a public golf course, which was just a stroke of luck for me because, even though I was starting to get into golf and watch it on TV and stuff, because the rest of my family didn't play, we wouldn't have joined a country club. And if we had, we would have been on a waiting list until I was in high school. So that public course was just everything for me. But then what got me interested in design, the little bit that my dad did play, he worked for Unilever. He bought commodities for them. So once or twice a year, he'd go on like a convention trip with all the people that he did business with over the phone all year. And when I was a young kid, they'd hold it in a cool city like Seattle, and they'd just do a day's golf outing at a private club. But about the time I was 10 or 11, it started to get too big for that, so they started going to golf resorts instead. So I saw Harbortown when it was brand new. I saw Pinehurst number 2 and played it when I was 12, and then Pebble Beach when I was 13. And then that
Probably
group,
a lot cheaper
that
back
group
then, huh?
of his, they decided they really liked Pebble Beach, so they went back to Pebble Beach every other year. And it was always in August, so we always got to go on a family vacation. I played Pebble Beach a ton of times as a teenager.
For free too.
For almost free. Yeah, I mean, believe it or not, the twilight rate for Pebble Beach in 1975 or 6 when I was a kid was $40.
Do you know what it is now?
I don't even know if they have a twilight rate. I've heard the full
I don't
rate
think they
is
do.
$800. Yeah.
So what got you? So you went to Cornell. You studied or you graduated with design and landscape architecture.
Yeah. Well, when I was 18, I actually started in college at MIT. I was a freshman there, and like halfway through my freshman year, I was like, I just can't imagine sitting in an office all day doing all this computer stuff that my roommates do. It's just going to drive me bonkers. I'm reading my golf books all the time. I got to see if I can pursue this. So I started writing letters to people in the golf business, like, how do you do what I want to do? Because there was no obvious career path. If you looked at who were the best known designers, Pete Dye had no training for it. He was just a good golfer who got started. And so I wrote everybody in the golf business I could think of to ask for advice. And because most of them hadn't got a letter like that before, I got a ton of help. I was pen pals with all kinds, Dean Beeman and Ben Crenshaw and the editors of Golf Magazine and just a ton of people. And pretty much everybody said, go work for Pete Dye. So I started writing letters to him too, just bug him to go work on a construction crew somewhere. And it took until I was a junior in college to get that. But so I only went to landscape architecture school because that's the advice I got from Jeff Cornish, the old New England architect who passed away a couple years ago.
Right.
He had actually built the little public course that I grew up on.
Oh, wow.
Does anyone ever write letters to you?
All the time. I get... We had an internship program for years. It's been harder to do the last few because, work is kind of sporadic, I'm happy to take interns to work on construction projects if I have somewhere to send them when they're available. But if we're building a golf course in New Zealand, I can't really take a bunch of kids down there unless they're there already. So, but we would get at the peak of the business, I had 60 or 80 applications a year for that, and a ton of kids who seemed really bright, had seen a lot of golf courses on their own. It was just amazing how many there were. And it is amazing how much really good young talent there is in my business right now with nothing to do, because they're not building new golf courses at any kind of rate anymore. And all these young people that have been reading about golf course architecture for 10, 15 years and working on cool projects, there's not enough places for them to go.
Mm-hmm. Right. Do you think now it's more into the reconstruction, right? Am I correct with that?
I mean, there were 100+ golf course architects working 10 years ago before the recession, building 300 new courses a year and in the U.S. and that many more overseas. And since the recession, there's been about 10 new golf courses a year. So obviously there's a lot of people scrambling around looking to stay in the business. And, it's all gotten focused on restoration. And, I think restoration of good golf courses is a great thing, but, it's amazing how many people saw Jesus all of a sudden and decided they were restoration experts when there weren't any more new golf courses to do.
Kind of like podcast hosts. You worked with Pete Dye. How long did you work with Pete Dye for?
One summer when I was in college, and then I went back for my senior year of college, and I had, one of the linchpins of my career was Cornell gave me a postgraduate scholarship to study golf course design by going to the UK and traveling around for a year and, getting to see everything there. That was like a license to steal, honestly. And then, I saw every, I saw like 170 golf courses. I caddied in St. Andrews for a month and a half.
How was that?
Awesome. It was weird. That was back when it was really cheap to play 40 years ago. It was like 15 pounds.
You
Was
keep
the
bringing
most
this up.
expensive green fee in the UK. It's
Yeah.
just amazing how much that's changed. But they finally figured out if people are going to pay to fly over there, they'll pay more than $20 to play.
So you walked? You said you walked 170 courses, or you saw 170 courses?
Yeah, and played probably half of them, or a little more than half of them. They were like, because I was on an official scholarship. They were all just super nice to me. And I'd gotten pretty good at that. I got around to see most of the best private courses in the States when I was in college too, if I hadn't already. The combination of having worked for Mr. Dye and having that scholarship and starting to write stuff for Golf Magazine. I mean, I pretty much had open doors everywhere I went. Sometimes it would take 2 letters instead of 1 to get into a place like Pine Valley. But, it was just incredible. And I've had that help kind of all the way through my career. So I worked for Pete one summer before college. And then after I got back from my year overseas, I went right back to work and worked for him and his sons for like 3 or 4 years. Enough so, when I started, I was just like the lowest grunt on the crew, raking bunker faces to make them look good before they seeded them. But I had a brain for math. So when Pete figured that out, he'd have me like help check the greens with him to make sure that, the greens didn't have weren't too steep where he wanted to put hole locations, that kind of stuff. Cause I could survey it and also tell him what percent of fall we had from the last reading the whole way through. And gradually I got, I knew how to draw a plan. Pete didn't like to draw plans that much and certainly didn't like to look at them once he started building. So that was, but some people made him draw them anyway. So I could do that for him. And, and eventually I was working on a project in Denver, a public course north of the city called Riverdale Dunes that Pete's son was doing. And we got to the point that, the 2 guys that were shaping it, running the bulldozer, running the equipment were, they were just part-time guys. One of them had to go back and, he taught school a lot of the year, and he'd been doing that all summer, and me kind of directing him on what to do, but he was getting ready to go and we weren't done with the golf course yet. And I looked at him like, well, you got about 3 weeks to teach me how to do what you're doing because I'm going to be the only one left. But that was everything for my career too, because, once I learned how to actually build something, I could go to clients on my own and say, not just say, I'm going to design this for you, but I can get this built for you. And here's how much it's going to cost. And, that enabled me to start getting jobs on my own when I was really young.
What is the best advice Pete ever gave you?
Oh, everything he said.
Okay, pick one thing. Or what's the one that sticks out the most?
Well, probably the most important was just, he said pretty early on when we were working at Long Cove that first summer, he was just like, he said, well, I tried to do that thing of drawing plans and getting a contractor and, letting them build it to the plans. And I just didn't like the way the golf course turned out, and he said, I finally decided that the only way I could make it really turn out the way I wanted was to be there a lot and really be in charge of the thing. So instead of just sitting in an office and drawing plans for a bunch of golf courses, that, in that main phase of his career, from when he built Crooked Stick in the 60s through maybe Kiowa or Whistling Straits or just after that, most of the time Pete and I was only doing one project at a time. And he and Alice were renting a house there. And, the first summer I worked for them at Long Cove, I was there like 90 days in the summer. And I guarantee you, Pete Dye was there at 6:30 in the morning with the crew, like 60 or 70 days out of 90.
Wow. That's amazing. So just to go back a little bit. So when you were in college, you were overseas and you're walking the golf course. Can you just explain, like, what were you doing? Were you drawing? Were you just taking it all in, taking notes? Like what was Tom doing when he was walking?
I took 1 million pictures, which I've still got in a file cabinet here. They're all slides; they're not digital. I made notes along the way, not so much drawings. I mean, I'm not, people think of golf course architects as artists, but I'm not really a good freehand drawing type person at all. But I would draw little plans of things, or just make enough notes that I got it in my head for good. And, it's not like I really go back and look at the notes much, but if you ask me, I'd be still really good at a pop quiz of, what's the fifth hole at Dornick like, or, any good golf course, because I've spent a lot of time on a lot of them. And, looking at the details of stuff. And, Pete said to me before I left that, I should look at some of the famous holes really closely and kind of memorize certain things about them. So when somebody told me I built a green that was too narrow, I could just shoot back, well, the green on the road hole at St. Andrews is only 45 feet between the bunker and the road. How can you say what I'm doing is too narrow?
Yeah, exactly.
Or the green on the 11th at St. Andrews has 5.5 feet of fall from back to front, or anything like that. And so I did that, and I remember a lot of those details. But so that's what I thought I was doing, was like picking up all kinds of little details that I would use in a design somewhere down the road. And I certainly do that from time to time. But the great thing about living over there for a year was mostly seeing how different the attitude is toward the game of golf and how much more a part of their lives it is. Mm-hmm. And, that's one of the things I've tried to bring back with me as much as I could. The American attitude toward golf, which unfortunately we are now exporting to a lot of other countries in the world, because everywhere in Asia, they don't hire Scottish guys to help them design golf courses. They hire us. And, and we tell them, hey, you need wall-to-wall concrete cart paths and all this other stuff that's just, adds to the cost, but doesn't really, it kind of detracts from the game.
Mm-hmm. So like when you're doing these golf courses and you go to these sites when there's nothing there but trees or just the plain land, like, I played Lost Dunes, and I believe it's I-94 going right through the middle of the property. So talk about some of those challenges there. I mean, it's a fabulous golf course, and we had a lot of fun. I only played it the one day, but, it's kind of weird that you're on this beautiful piece of property, but you got a major highway going right through the middle of it. So talk, maybe some challenges that you may have to deal with that maybe are more unique than just a major highway going through it.
Well, every site's different. That's the cool part about it. I mean, that's what's going to make my work not be just cookie cutter doing the same thing from one place to the next. I really, I'd get bored with that pretty fast if that was the case. And you almost have to fight your clients on it some, because obviously most of the ones that call you, they played Pacific Dunes, and they tell you, I'd love you to build a golf course just like Pacific Dunes. Julian Robertson, not long after Julian Robertson, hedge fund guy in New York, played Pacific Dunes the second day it was open, and called me about a month later about having a look at a project for him in New Zealand called Cape Kidnappers, which is on the cliffs like Bandon, but it's 400 feet above the water instead of 100. And the soil, it's not sandy up there. The soils are entirely different. So, Julian just kept saying he wanted something like Pacific Dunes. And I was like, I understand, but this is a way different piece of land. We can't build bunkers the same way. The bunkers aren't going to look right. Those bunkers aren't going to look right up here anyway. Have a little faith. We'll figure out something that fits this site really well. But you do need clients to understand that if they want something that's really good and really different, you can't tell them exactly what that's going to be right at the beginning. And of course, most of them would be much more comfortable if you just said, oh yeah, I'll build you another Pacific Dunes, no problem.
But one of the best advice I've ever, a good friend of mine, he's in commercial, what do you call it? Construction. And he said, you got the money, we can do anything for you. That's what you should have said to Mr. Julian. Sure, whatever you want.
Well, Julian actually taught me a little about that. There was one point where I'd looked at building another tee for one of the par threes, like across this ravine. And when I looked at it, as we got further along in the project, I went over there and looked at it again. I was like, no, this doesn't really add anything. And you're going to have to like build a damn bridge to get over here. It's going to be pretty expensive. So the next time Julian was walking through, he said, what about that tee you wanted to build over there? And I said I decided we didn't need to do it, but I mentioned the money part. And he said, whoa, stop right there. Don't ever talk to clients that way. It's up to you to tell us whether it's better, and it's up to us to decide if we can afford it or not. But if I didn't tell you to worry about that, you shouldn't. As soon as I do tell you that that's an issue, then you should be cognizant of it. But he said, you look at this as like a $4 million golf course. I look at this as like a $25 million project where the golf course is the most important part. If the golf course isn't really good, we're not doing the rest of it. So that building that bridge is a drop in the bucket on the overall cost of the thing. But if you tell me it's not any better over there, then okay, I don't want to do it if it's not better.
That's funny.
Did Mike Kaiser tell you that too?
Mike never really talked about the money much at all. And I think I'd gotten to know him a little bit. I actually was unofficially signed up to do the second course at Bandon like 3 or 4 years before they finished building the first one. So I'd gotten to know Mike pretty well in the process, and he knew me well enough to know that I was pretty thrifty and not spending money like it was water, spending it like it was mine. So he never worried about us from a budget standpoint at all.
So talk a little bit about the timeline, from the time you're going to do this project, from the time maybe how long the design phase is to the construction to the finished project.
I knew an old golf course architect who passed away a couple of years ago. I won't name him, but he described the process as 3 to 5, like a prison sentence.
Sounds like marriage.
Yeah.
From the time you first get a call, half the time we get a call, the owner already has the ground and he's fairly committed to doing something, and the other half they're just looking and starting to talk about it, and they haven't bought a piece of land. They might not even have a topo map of the land they're looking at yet, so you can try to work on it a little bit. That used to be one of my good signs early on for whether somebody was serious about it or not, was did they have a map yet, because it cost a little bit of money to get one. Right. And if they weren't even going to invest that in it, then it probably wasn't that serious. So I'll try to get the map before I go there the first time, so that when I do get on the ground, I'm not just wandering around aimlessly. I've actually got some things I want to look at that looks like a hole, or I'd like to see that corner of the property and see if that's going to fit in well, or whether I shouldn't worry about building any holes over there. So, okay, this is a real project. Now we want you to start working on a routing. Sometimes it's kind of like writing a song. Sometimes it comes together just like that, and sometimes it takes a long time, and you just keep, you don't keep doing it all over again, but you've got a plan that you kind of like, but you keep working on this little 3 or 4 holes over here because you think you can find a better solution for that piece. And then maybe something comes up and you redo it a couple of holes down in the other corner. But it sort of evolves. What I don't do, I don't draw 3 or 4 different plans and show them to the client to ask what they think, because they don't know what they're looking at on the map. They can't visualize that in 3D out on the ground unless I go out and walk them through it. They wouldn't even be able to find where they were. I'm showing them one plan at a time and trying to get their feedback on what they like and what they don't, so I can keep working on it if I need to. But there's been a couple of them that I pretty much did the entire plan before I ever went to the site, because the map was really good and there wasn't anything out there I didn't expect.
Wow.
And other projects, I was nowhere close the first time. And, it took like 3 or 4 visits over the space of a year or even a year and a half to kind of get the plan settled. And then once you've got a plan, you've got to get permits. And some clients have to go get money too. Hopefully they have that. The permitting can take anywhere from tomorrow to 4 years. You just, in California, it takes, I've been planning a project in California for 3 solid years at this point. We might get to construction on it this summer.
Wow.
It's just so complicated. So many engineers and so many little, the permitting's kind of like every government agency has their own little box they have to check off. So the Fish and Wildlife Service has to check off that they don't have a problem with it.
Right.
And obviously, if you've got no streams or anything, you're not going to have a problem with that. But if you've got anything like, if you've got anything that's going to raise their interest, then you've got to address that. And, archaeology and just a whole checklist of things. And, and in California, and on top of that, in California, some neighbor's likely to sue you because they don't want to see the project developed at all, just to tie it up for a while and hope you go away.
Right.
Wow.
Whereas, one of Bill Corr's favorite stories of all times is when they were starting Sandhills, he and the client went into like the registrar for the town to ask what they had to do to get a permit to build a golf course out there. And the guy was like, he didn't understand. He was like, permit? You mean you need to get a permit to do what you want to do on your land? You don't need permits for that. Not much of America is like that anymore, though.
No.
So that's, say, a year is maybe typical for that. And then it'll take 9 months to a year to actually build the golf course, and another 9 months to a year to grow it in so it's ready to play on. So, the fastest I've ever seen one happen from start to finish, and it was because they had a head start on the permits already, was 2 years from the time they called me till opening day. But more realistically, it's 3 or 4.
Wow. That's amazing.
So one of the funny things about it is a lot of times when people are talking to me about my newest golf course, I did that a year and a half ago. And my brain's already on other things that you won't see for quite a while.
Right. That's funny. How would you describe yourself as a designer?
Well, part of it goes back to how I am as a golfer, which is at my best, I was like a 5 or 6 handicap. I'm probably a 10 or 12 now. So I was never a great player. I was a good player with a good short game. And that really, my courses have a little more emphasis on short game than most other designers' golf courses. I think as fast as greens are now, a lot of designers are just afraid to have anything going on the greens for fear they'll get too fast and it just won't be playable and everybody will scream and point fingers at them like they did something wrong. But, I've spent enough time on all the really good golf courses to know that that's one of the things that makes them cool. And, as long as you really understand that and how much slope is there and what you can and can't do, you can build greens that are fairly severe, but they still work. You said you love Pasatiempo earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Pasatiempo has like 5 greens that have more than 5 feet of fall from back to front.
Isn't that fun?
Built on the side of a steep hill. And that just barely works at the speeds they're going now.
Mm-hmm.
There's no incentive for them to get the greens 13 or 14 instead of 10 or 11. But still, the funny thing is a lot of these clubs, even when they don't need the speed, they still go for it anyway. And then they call you and say, well, we need to flatten this green. And it's like, no, you need to stop mowing it 3 times every morning.
So is there any courses back when you, especially in the early days that you were walking, that you wish you got to walk but didn't get a chance to?
Very little. I've walked around pretty much all of the top 100 golf courses. I've seen like 1,200 golf courses,
Wow.
and I'm only going to see ones that I think are going to be good. So I've seen most of the ones on 4 continents that anybody would name, and a bunch of them the really good ones I've been back to quite a few times, so I really know them pretty well.
Is there any
whether
courses,
I'm a consultant on them or not?
is there any courses that you have walked that you wish you would have played?
Yeah, I mean, I've been lucky to be invited to play most of these places. The one where it never worked out for me to play is Oakmont.
Me neither.
I've been there 3 or 4 times. I know the golf course pretty well. I could probably build the 13th green for you just right out here if you wanted me to, but I just haven't had a chance to play it, which at the speeds those greens are might be a good thing.
So what projects do you have going right now, if you're allowed to speak of them?
Yeah, there's always some you can't really talk about, but so we just finished a project in Ireland. I wanted to do a golf course. I spent a month of that year overseas in Ireland, and I've always thought I'd love to do a golf course there someday. And I looked at a couple over the years that fell through for whatever reason, going back to, was it the Old Head way before they built that, but that didn't work out. And then we had a project there that looked like it was a really good thing, and Bill Corr was going to build a course, and I was going to build a course, and then they just couldn't get permits, period.
Wow.
The EU, when Ireland joined the EU, they made it really hard to develop anything in untouched dunes. They just basically drew red lines over everything that wasn't already developed and said, no, you need a special permit for this. And they've never given one. so it's, people, every once in a while, somebody thinks they've got a way that it's going to happen. Having gone through the process once, I don't think it's going to happen. So I'd almost given up. But the one thing that you can do is change around a golf course that's already there. Once it's grandfathered in as a golf course, they don't really care about you moving a green or even rebuilding the whole thing. So there's this place way up in the northwest in County Donegal called Rosapenna. It's about an hour and a half west of Portrush, which is actually back in Ireland instead of Northern Ireland.
Right.
And somebody 30 years ago went out and built a golf course next door to it called St. Patrick's. And it was really underfunded, and it didn't last very long, but it's a beautiful piece of ground. And because it was there when the EU drew all their red lines, the red line goes around it, and it was still, they kept mowing it just enough to keep it officially a golf course, so nobody would say it was off limits. So like 10 or 12 years ago, Jack Nicklaus was going to do a golf course there. And then no sooner did he start than the economy crashed, and they just abandoned it. And eventually the owners of the resort bought the land up because nobody else was really going to do it. And I've been talking to them about that thing for 10 years. And we finally got the money together a year ago to go ahead and build the golf course. And, we were half done with it, or a little more than half done with it when COVID hit. And I couldn't go back to finish it. And, luckily, a couple of the young people that work for me are Europeans, so they were on site and had no problems getting back and forth to work on it. And we finally got it finished this summer, so it'll open in June. Really excited for it, especially since I haven't really seen it finished. It's been a year since I was there because of COVID. And I hope I can be there for the grand opening. We'll see. But the new ones we're working on, that resort, the thing I told you about in California that's taken forever to permit is a very, very high-end resort project just north of Napa County. Like part of it's in Napa County and part of it's
There we
just
go.
over the line.
Oh.
Which it has to be. So it's about a 30-minute drive from Sandalina. It's a little bit north. You have to go over, it's kind of a winding drive up over the hill to get there.
Is it Calistoga, Tom?
It's Middletown, or it's close to Middletown is the closest town. So that's
Okay.
a little
bit farther north. Yep. Okay.
Yeah. But it's a huge site. They own like 20,000 acres, and yeah, wow. And with unbelievable dramatic elevation changes all over it, and all these beautiful old California oaks, and the golf course we've got planned is pretty spectacular. It's not in the ocean. I've worked on the ocean front a few times, but I would say this site is just as spectacular as any of those. And we've just been crossing our fingers the last 3 years that the place doesn't burn down before we get a chance to build it, because the fires have been around that area.
Mm-hmm.
But it looks like we're going to finally go ahead on that this year. We've got another project to do in New Zealand. My client who built Taraiti, which is really private, is doing a resort down the beach 5 miles with 2 golf courses. Bill Core is building the first of them right now, and then I'm going to go back and build a second one as soon as he gets done with his. So that's only about an hour and a half north of Auckland. New Zealand is a beautiful place to visit, but obviously most people only ever get there once in their lives. So it's kind of a tough market to build a golf course, especially if you price it out. A lot of the newer courses there are kind of priced out of where most New Zealanders can afford them. This is close enough to Auckland. It's only about an hour and a half, that it should get a decent amount of business from Auckland. That's where most of the money is in New Zealand. So, I kind of like it to Bandon in that, Bandon's original success had a lot to do with people from Portland and Seattle just going up there. Even if they were members of a club, they'd still go play Bandon too, especially in the winter when Bandon is sandy. So even if it's rainy, you can still play golf, and all those clubs are muddy, a muddy mess, or under 2 inches of water or something. And it's the same in Auckland. Most of the golf courses in Auckland are just on heavy clay and don't drain very well. And, up by Taraiti, you could play golf any day. And then, I was signed up to do a third course for the resort at Sand Valley in Wisconsin. That got put off last year because of COVID. And the town is a partner in that thing. And they thought, they built 2 golf courses already. They've done everything pretty fast, and the town was kind of holding back, being conservative about approving going ahead with another golf course. So instead, they're going to build a private course across the street that they can finance. They can finance separately. They've already signed up a bunch of members to do it, and so they can build another course and, of course, have resort guests play in the afternoon or something like that. And for that, we're going to build a replica of the old Lido course on Long Island that was one of the best golf courses in America up till 1935 or 40, and then just went under. So, I've heard people talk about doing a project like that for 20 years, and it's just crazy that we're actually getting started on doing it now.
So that's replacing, I guess it was the third course at Sand Valley to be what, Sedge Valley, I think it was?
Yeah, that was probably I don't know if that would have wound up being the name or not. That was the working title. And hopefully that'll go ahead eventually, but it'd probably just be a couple more years down the road before it does.
Right. So you have 4 courses ranked in the top 100 in the world, according to top 100 courses in the world by Golf Magazine.
No, I think I got more than that now.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know when that was put. I mean, you can see the research. Okay, so let's say you have 4.5. Okay, let's just be nice. 4. Okay, we'll go to 5. What is one course that you've designed that you think is very underrated? That doesn't get the accolades that maybe some of these other courses you've developed or built, designed has?
Yeah, there's 2 or 3. I mean, the one I did in Australia, I've done I've done 3 courses in Australia and New Zealand. They're all in the top 100 golf courses in the world. Taraiti, Kidnappers, and Barnbougle Dunes in Australia. And the 4th course I did there is a place called St. Andrews Beach, which is an hour south of Melbourne, right on the coast, except it's one dune. There's one big dune with a bunch of houses on it between the golf course and the ocean. So you don't have the ocean views like the other ones have. It is as good a piece of land for golf as I've ever built anything on. We didn't have to move dirt around at all. It's almost like for my career, it's almost like sandhills in terms of, boy, this is just laying here. We could build this really quickly and not spend a lot of money doing it. But the thing had financial problems right from the get-go. They tried to sell expensive memberships in Melbourne, and that's a hard business because it doesn't cost much to join all the good clubs in Melbourne. So, trying to sell memberships for 3 times what Royal Melbourne members pay doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
So it went bankrupt. It struggled around for a while. Now it's a public golf course. It only costs about $60 or $70 to play. It is the bargain of bargains of really good golf courses in Australia. And that's the golf course I wish I had in my backyard. I mean, it's just a beautiful place. The funny thing, I worked with Michael Clayton on it, who played the European Tour for years and a good friend of mine. And Mike does have a house just down like a mile down the road. So he gets to go play it all the time. And it's only 10,000 miles from my house. I don't get to go back there.
What about in the States? What's one course that you think is underrated that you've designed that doesn't get the accolades maybe?
Well, I'm tired of hearing Stream Song Blue is the 3rd best golf course there because it's pretty damn good. But it seems like everybody had their minds made up before they even saw them what order that was going to, which order the first 2 were going to be in. And then the 3rd one, anything new just gets hyped to the moon now.
Right.
Including all the new courses I'm doing too. So I'm not picking on anybody there. But I'm not sure that that's better than the other 2. I'll put it that way. I really think the loop that you missed is pretty underrated.
Right.
Everybody hears about the gimmick of it being reversible, and some people think it's a gimmick, and then other people they can't really wrap their brain around what that is. But to go play that 2 days in a row, it's so different from one day to the next. Like, you can't really imagine how different it is until you do it. Because you're playing into the same greens, but it's a different shot, it's a different background. You're coming in from a completely different angle. And I've had tons of people tell me I wouldn't have even realized it was the same golf course going back on it the next day. It just, everything about it feels different. It's pretty low key because to make it reversible, and make it work well was really complicated. So we had to simplify things as much as we could, like not have a lot of fairway bunkers because, it might work one way, but you're not going to see it the other way. So just don't have that. We don't really need that. So it's kind of stripped down. It's got a lot of little undulation in the fairways. I actually think it, from that aspect, it plays more like a links course than most of the courses I've built next to the sea. Because it's really got all that cool little stuff, and you never have a flat lie, and you're always playing off a hook lie or something. And the greens are really interesting, and they keep it really firm and fast. It's fescue fairways, and they do not overwater it. The ball bounces around a lot there. So, just playing it one day, it's a really good golf course. Playing it 2 days in a row and seeing how different it is, there's not much like that.
That's what amazes me about links courses, playing in Scotland and Ireland and England, is that, you play it and you walk by these bunkers on one day and you're like, why are these bunkers here? They're only 200 yards off the tee or whatever. And then the wind switches, right? They have a lot more elements than we do, say here, and the wind switches, and then all of a sudden they're in play and you're like, oh, that's why they're there. So, it's really unique. And this was, some of these courses built over 100 years ago, and it's just amazing how they stand the test of time. And I really do enjoy, like, playing those type of courses, because you see something different every day. And I don't understand how some people can play the same course every day of their life,
Oh, I
especially,
agree. And
you know.
I've been so lucky. After that year overseas, I thought, well, that was great, but I'm never going to really get a chance to build a links course. Nobody gets to do that anymore. And I've gotten to work on that type of project all over the world, in New Zealand, in Australia, on the Oregon coast. Uh, I built a course for Texas Tech University in Lubbock. It was a cotton field to start with, but we conjured it up a little bit. But talk about windy places. That's the windiest place I've ever worked. That's Barnbougle is really windy, but Lubbock is windier.
Well, it's flat. I mean, Lubbock, Texas. I mean, I had the good fortune and unfortune of driving from Houston to Fort Worth, and a lot of Texas is just flat, and there's nothing to block it, right? There's no big trees.
Lubbock is super flat. That was like a 250-acre site, and the northwest corner was 3 feet higher than the southeast corner. So the water just barely moved across there at all. And that was the hardest thing about trying to figure out how to build it. Was we had to be careful to make sure that water kept going across there and didn't just get trapped in a bathtub that filled up 10 feet.
I want to go back to the loop for a second. I believe you're the only golf course architect or designer that has built 2 courses in one. Where did that kind of thought come from when you presented that to Lou Thompson? What did he think? Did he think you were crazy? Did you think, hey, this is fantastic? It's not common to have 2 courses in one, technically, correct?
No, it's not. So the idea comes from the back of Tom Simpson's book on golf course architecture, which he wrote in 1929. Simpson was an English architect. He did a lot of work for very wealthy people, both in the UK and on the continent, sometimes just building them like 3 holes at their house. And that would get, talk about getting old fast, playing the same 3 holes over and over would get really old. So he built some of them to be reversible. And he did a little diagram in the back of his book showing how he had done one. And you could just follow it around with your finger. And it's like, boy, those holes are just totally different playing the other way around. Because they weren't just, a straight fairway into the green. It was like a patch of fairway here, or could you carry it to the next little patch of fairway over there? And then when you're playing it backwards, it's the other way around. And now you've got to get to the other patch of fairway. So, always an idea I had in the back of my head. I actually proposed it to the donor of the golf course for Texas Tech, but he didn't go for the idea. He was an engineer. I thought it might appeal to him, but he was worried that it wouldn't look pretty, which is kind of, you can't worry too much about how it looks if you're going to make it reversible. And obviously you can't, a lot of the stuff we do to make a golf course pretty, make the bunker look pretty, you flare it up so you're getting a really good look at it. But if you do that and try to play backwards, you've made it less visible. When I went over to Forest Dunes the first time to talk with Lou, I'd moved to Northern Michigan after doing 2 of my first courses here. I bought a house here, and then I hadn't worked anywhere near home for like 20 years. I was working everywhere else on the planet except here. And I did mention to a couple of friends that I would love to do another project close to home, and they just happened to be going to an outing at Forest Dunes the next day. And Lou said he was thinking about building another golf course, and these guys said, well, you got to talk to Tom. We were just talking to him about this yesterday. So I went over, and I kind of expected that the land wasn't going to be really dramatic. I mean, obviously it's not next to an ocean, but I'd seen the first course and I knew there wasn't a lot of like super big elevation changes over there or anything. And it had been forest, but it had all been thinned out one time, and there weren't too many like really dramatic trees on it. So, I've thought about this reversible thing for a long time, and it kind of needs to be a flatter site. And it kind of needs to not have a lot of big trees and obstacles in the way for it to work. So I'm going around just looking at the site, and in the back of my head, I'm like, yeah, this would kind of work for that. And then, I sat down with Lou and said, well, what do you want? And he said, two things. He said, the main problem that we have at this place is, he'd bought the thing at a fire sale. It had been losing money for years. And, and the main reason was that it lost so much kind of in the clubhouse and on everything else. I mean, everybody liked the golf course, but nobody stayed. Nobody even stayed to have a drink, much less dinner. They'd get back in the car and go up to Gaylord or come to Traverse City or something else. Yeah, but that was the whole business. So they were losing money like crazy in that end of the operation. So he said his number one goal was to get people to stay there and play again the next day. And then number two, he wanted something that was going to wow people and attract a lot of attention. And I thought, I was like, this is the perfect guy for this concept. The whole idea of the reversible golf course is you stay and so you can play it backwards the next day. Mm-hmm. And then would it attract attention? Yeah, it was going to attract attention, and Lou would get that. And by the same token, Lou is not in the golf business. So, if I tried to sell this concept to some of my other clients, they would have asked me, well, what are the raters going to think of that? And I would have had to say, I don't know. They're probably not going to like it because they won't even know what they're supposed to rate. Do they rate the two separate courses separately? Do they rate it all as one thing? What do they do with it? They don't know. And that's true. They don't know. That's one of the reasons I think it's underrated, because they don't know how to deal with that.
Right.
But Lou wasn't going to ask a question like that. So I didn't tell him right away. I went home and tried to draw that up and spent a couple weeks on it. And I went back over there to present it to him. And I rolled out a map for the golf course, just showing it being played one way. And I was talking through it with him, and I stopped to get his feedback, and he said, well, that looks like a really good golf course, but I don't think that's going to wow people. And then I pulled up the map that I was showing him, and underneath it was a map of it being played the other way around. And I said, yeah, but this is the part that's going to wow. The fact that you can play it all backwards and it's a different golf course. And there were about 4 people in the room, and nobody said anything for about 30 seconds. And then Lou said, well, that wowed me.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Well, I guess, what is the favorite book you've ever written, and also the favorite course you designed?
Well, the book that kind of put my name out there with a lot of people is The Confidential Guide to Golf Courses, which just started. I wrote it for friends originally, just, little like 1-paragraph reviews of all the golf courses I'd seen. Because I traveled so much that everybody I knew that I'd been all these places. Mm-hmm. They'd call me all the time. Oh, I'm going to Scotland. What little course should I go see while I'm over there? I figured I'll just write it down. I've got time. So I wrote the first version of it, and gave it away to like 40 people. And the feedback on it was exceptional, because I wasn't writing it for a general audience. It was dead honest. I didn't pull punches. I wasn't worried about offending anybody, because I didn't think they'd see it. I was only writing it for my friends. So, if it was just a boring course and I had nothing to say, I would argue about whether it was the worst course I'd ever seen, or make fun of some feature that I didn't like, or say, my mother-in-law's favorite line in that book is, this has a great 18th hole, but the rest is mostly hamburger helper. And to this day, that book generates reaction. Eventually I did do a published version of it, because it was already, people were mad about it, but it was already out there. And, a couple of my good friends said, you should definitely publish that, because that shows everybody what you really know. That you have been to all these places, and you have an opinion of all these places. And most people agree with most of your opinions. that book would not be controversial at all if most people didn't agree with most of it. You never, the three of us are never going to be on the same page. Yeah, we can all agree that Dornick is a great course, but if we go through 10 or 20, all of us are going to have one or two that we have something we don't like. And I do too. I'm the only one who ever put that in print and took the flack for it. But at the same time, that made my reputation as somebody who has really had an opinion, had seen everything, and was pretty honest and sounded like he knew what he was doing. And it's really helped my career indirectly. The book that I just finished is more a book about how I route golf courses, and it took a bunch of my early projects and kind of went through the process of how I came up with those ideas. So that's probably the most personal to me, but no doubt the confidential guide is the one that people know the best. Favorite project that I've done, man, when I started, I was just happy to be doing golf courses. Although I never, I always wanted to be in this business to work on great golf courses. I would have rather just kept working for Pete Dye and work on really cool projects than go out on my own and just get boring pieces of land to work with. But, I was lucky enough to get both. And so when I did Pacific Dunes, I thought, I'll never see another piece of land this good in my lifetime. And I don't know if I've seen one better, but I've worked on a dozen projects that if you'd have told the 25-year-old me, you get to build that golf course, I'd have said, I'd be happy with that, being the last thing I ever did, just to get a chance to work on that. So, those are the ones that are highly ranked, but it's also places like the Loop and Rock Creek in Montana, Stonewall in Pennsylvania. I've worked on a bunch of projects that were A, they were really fun to build, and B, they're really cool places to go back to. And I don't really have one that's way favorite over the others.
Who's your favorite child?
Yeah. Well, I'm a very opinionated person. I'm not going to tell you they're all equal.
Ain't that the truth?
Kids probably know better than that. But when you're splitting hairs between golf courses that are rated as, when people say they want, a lot of times I go to look at a new project and the client says, I want one of the top 50 golf courses in the world. And I look at them really hard and I'm like, do you know what the top 50 golf courses in the world are? Those are all pretty damn good, and they've all been there for a long time too. That's a hard ask.
And they're not going anywhere.
I have a ton of respect for all those golf courses.
Right.
So, so there's a few of them that I have a hard time picking between.
So, Tom Doak, you finish a golf course. You're sitting on the back patio of the golf course you just finished, just opened. What do you drink? Do you drink it all? Do you have a beverage, or do you sit there and just reflect on it with the glass of wine?
I'll have a beer or a glass of wine. More likely glass of wine if I'm with my wife, or if we're in New Zealand or Napa or one of those places. One of the coolest places I've worked is Bordeaux in France. We did a golf course outside Saint-Emilion for a French family that's very into golf, and what a beautiful project that is. Just a beautiful part of the world. But in northern Michigan, it's more likely to be Oberon or one of the many craft beers up here. There's a million of them here.
You didn't mention Bell's.
Well, Bell's makes Oberon.
I know. I'm just making sure you're paying attention, because I'm not. Obviously not. Well, Tom, thanks so much. I appreciate you joining Ben and I.
Yeah.
We're going to actually cut out here, and then we're going to do a little Patreon. We got a couple questions that some of our Patreon member supporters have given us. So, Tom, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Okay,
Tom, it was a real treat. Thank you.
Come up where I live and come play one of my golf courses one of these days.
Yeah, I will. I played Lost Dunes, but yeah, I got to go. Obviously, get to more. I was supposed to do a wine of it at Sabonic last year, and I have a little wine label. And didn't get a chance to. And then obviously Stream Song, Pasatiempo. And then I got to get to Bandon Dunes, obviously. I mean, I've had so many friends. Since I stopped playing, I haven't played much really. But yeah, we definitely, if I'm up in the area, I'll give you a shout and we'll go play some golf and then have a good time.
See, he said I, he didn't say we.
Or
he said
we,
I.
I mean, you know what I mean.
You know, I'm going to go.
Caddy for
You're
me.
welcome to come together or separately.
I'm going to play one of your courses. I've been to, let's see, Stream Song. I've been to Forest Dunes, and I still haven't played, but I've played Pasatiempo. So, Tom, thanks so much.